Hey, all, welcome to the podcast. I'm doing a daily reading of my book, Outdoing Jesus, and partly because, people are trapped at home, including me, and I want to think about something more than the failures of the Trump administration. That's what I do for so much of my day, and try to help religious people to deepen into their sense of faith and do what we can to save this planet and the people on it from Trump administration that I think is a real hazard to the well-being of this planet. But I don't want to think about that all the time. So I thought, people are doing these great concerts at their desks and live streaming things from their homes. We're doing a bunch of that. And I thought, I'll just read my book out loud to people. And if they want to come on Facebook or on Zoom, they can. If you're listening to this now and you want to join in chats, I'm popping up on Facebook when I'm able to squeeze these in. And then I'm opening up a Zoom webinar and inviting people to come and join me if you want to for a discussion. This particular episode, I cut out the discussion, so it's just the reading. These are chapters 3 and 4 of Outdoing Jesus. The subtitle is 7 Ways to Live the Promise of Greater Than. I like to refer to the subtitle of the book as How Ordinary People Are Outdoing Jesus, Why It's Good News, and How You're One of Them. So hope you enjoy, and here it is, chapters 3 and 4. Hey, I should just say this. There's a great quote from Jesus in the Gospel of John where he says, I should start every one of these like this, so that people who are just catching up now know what's going on. Jesus has a phrase where he says, those who believe in me will do the works that I'm doing and do even greater works than these. That's where this idea of outdoing Jesus comes from. The first 2 chapters, I lay out the argument that this is Jesus' big idea for all of humanity, that Jesus is not seeking to be the miraculous exception to humanity, but rather the magnificent rule for humanity. So the Gospel of John lays that out. So in chapters 3 and 4, I make a explanation about why the Gospel of John is structured the way that it is. So here we go. One of these is not like the others, the special invitation of the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John has always presented biblical scholars with some mysteries. It tells stories that the other Gospels don't tell. It's structured differently, uses language differently, maintains its own order of events, and includes a specific set of miraculous signs that are unique in content and meaning. This Gospel is essentially a world unto itself. Now, pardon me for a minute. I just lost my Kindle reader. It's supposed to be up there in front of me. Oh, this is a real tragedy when right in the middle of a live book reading, your Kindle app closes. But I will fix that in a second. So hold on a minute. Oh man, don't you just love the live feeling of being on the internet? All right, let me get back. Jeez Louise, it did it again. All right. If I have to go grab a physical copy of this book, that's going to be a whole other set of hang on a seconds. But let me see if I can get this to stay open this time. It seems to happen when I try to move the screen a little bit, so I will try not to move the screen quite as much. Really something, huh? All right. Great idea, Mr. Paget, to go live on the internet. This is why people don't try things, because things don't work all the time. Anyway, the Gospel of John is a world unto itself. There are all kinds of cultural and historic reasons why John's Gospel differs from the others, but I believe it is also explicitly crafted to make a special proclamation and invitation. The "they will do greater things" invitation is at the heart of its special nature. The intentional uniqueness of John's Gospel isn't a cryptic clue evident only to Bible aficionados and scholars. It's revealed right in the text. The Gospel makes a special point of saying that it was crafted for a particular outcome. The second to the last chapter of the Gospel closes with something like a thesis statement. Quote, "Then Jesus did many other miraculous signs in his disciples' presence, signs that are not recorded in this book. But these things are written so that you will believe that Jesus is the Christ, God's Son, and that by believing you will have life in his name." You see, the author of the Gospel of John offers a curated set of specific signs recorded in a particular order to produce a deliberate outcome. It's not a neutral account or biography meant to offer some highlights of Jesus' life. The Gospel of John, it's a recruitment piece, calling people to follow the selected signs down a particular path. Now, there's plenty of scholarship on why John tells some stories and not others, so I'm not going to unpack all of those here. Instead, I want to dive into the words used to tell those stories. To me, the deliberate use of language in the gospel is compelling, particularly the way the author uses the words believe and life. Little author-reader side note, this I think is among the more important parts of this entire book. So anyway, stick with me here. The term, quote, believe is used more than 80 times in the gospel. You can hardly turn a page without running across the word. It's important to this discussion to clarify terms, specifically the difference between the words belief and believe. Belief, as you know, is a noun. And if you're like me, you can hear your elementary school teacher, or even more like me, Schoolhouse Rock, reminding you that a noun is a person, a place, or a thing. Belief functions as a thing, something that you can take hold of or hold on to. It's like faith, which is also a noun, where believe, on the other hand, it's obviously a verb. We do believing and we hold beliefs. Now, this distinction has significant impact on how we understand the use of the word believe in the Gospel of John. This verb-noun distinction, it's not only true in English, it's also true in the Greek, the language in which the Gospel of John was written. In Greek, the word for believe is pistou. The noun belief is pistis. Just as in English, pistis is often used to mean faith as a noun, and the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke use both the noun pistis and the verb pistou repeatedly. The Gospel of John, however, well, it only uses the word pistou. John never uses pistis, belief, not even once in the whole Gospel of John. The lack of the use of pistis is very unusual. Of the 27 books of the New Testament, 24 use the word pistis. The 3 exceptions, the ones that never use the word, the Gospel of John, 2 John, and 3 John. Now, clearly, this is an intentional choice by the author. I believe it is because the story that the author of John is telling calls the audience into the action of believing, not into the state of belief. I almost want to read that again. I feel like if you had this book in your hand, you would read it again. In fact, on the Kindle version that I have, I can see it's one of the most highlighted phrases in the entire book. I believe that this use of only the word believe and not belief is intentional because the author, back to the reading, calls the audience into the action of believing, not into the state of belief. Now, that has significance on how we understand Jesus saying, I assure you that whoever believes in me will do the works I'm doing and do even greater works than these. If we interpret the verb believes as a noun like belief, then we might be led to assume that this assurance of participating in doing what Jesus does is limited to only those who hold proper beliefs. But when we correctly understand it as a verb, then this invitation is for anyone who's in the act of believing or living in the way of Jesus. As we explore the miracles in the Gospel of John, we will see over and over again how Jesus calls people to believe, not to belief. This believing is about doing and outdoing. It's about walking on the same path and living with the same power of God in us, the same power that is in Jesus. Those who believe in Jesus' name do the things that Jesus does. See, we can see the power in the gospel's intention that believing you will have life in his name. The act of believing, of living in a way of Jesus, it brings about life. It's not about holding the right set of assumptions, doctrines, or beliefs. The Gospel of John also uses the word Zoe, the term for life, and it uses it a lot. In fact, more than 40 times, including the opening poem in chapter 1, what came into being through the word was life, and the closing line of the last chapter of the book, you will have life and have life in his name. Well, by comparison, Matthew uses this word life 7 times, Luke 5 times, and Mark only 4 times. But life is used 135 times in the New Testament, and the Gospel of John, it accounts for nearly 1/3 of those uses. Life is what the Gospel of John is all about. Another unique feature of this gospel is its frequent pairing of the term eternal with the word life. Just as believe is commonly misread as belief, so is eternal life often misunderstood as a reference to the afterlife or heaven. But that's not what eternal means. Eternal is not referencing a place, it's describing a kind of life. The Gospel of John uses this particular word, which means without beginning or end, that which always has been and always will be. Jesus doesn't promise an afterlife with the phrase. He's describing the indelible, abundant, everlasting quality of life. Jesus is beckoning humanity to a life that has been and always will be, the ancient and present way of life. The gospel is at its core a recruitment piece, beckoning people to an everlasting path of life, to join, editorializing here now in my own writing, to join the very path that Jesus was also walking on. Well, let me just check this comment here. I didn't think there was a comment, so I think we're good. Another quality of the Gospel of John is that it serves as a kind of creation story for life on this everlasting path. You see, creation narratives give people a context for who they are, how they got here, and what they ought to do. All cultures have creation stories. Some have a classic myth structure, and others are hidden inside of history lessons. We mark the creation of our nation with holidays. We have creation stories for the companies on our about pages of our websites. We keep alive the creation stories of relationships by marking anniversaries and telling stories of how we fell in love and keeping photo albums of how we became a family. We mark our own beginnings by celebrating our birthdays. There is a considerable power that's found in our origin stories, and they help us know how and why we were formed and remind us of what we hold dear. The Gospel of John is structured to invoke the power of the Hebrew creation story from the book of Genesis. It reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the Word, and without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and that life was the light for all people. The light shined in the darkness, and the darkness does not extinguish the light." From the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Consider a few of the many structural elements of John's gospel that connect to the Genesis narrative. Perhaps you remember the Genesis narrative. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then goes for 7 days of creation, the seventh day being a day of rest. Well, both the poem in John and the poem in the book of Genesis are similar in that they both begin as poems in their prologue. The power and the beauty and the truthfulness of poetry has been a part of the faith of the Hebrew people and the Christians from the very beginning. In the beginning, there was a poem. Secondly, the quote, in the beginning, actually starts both of these same poems. Thirdly, there are 7 miraculous signs in the Gospel of John and 7 days of creation in the story of Genesis. Fourthly, the Word is connected to creation. In Genesis, God said, and it was. And in John, the phrase, in the beginning was the Word, and everything that came into being through the Word. Fifthly, both of the creation stories use light and life. There was darkness on the land, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, from Genesis 1. In John's version, the light was for all people. What came into being through the Word was life, and that life was the light for all people. The poem continues from Gospel of John. Those who did welcome him, those who believed in his name, he authorized to become children of God, not born of blood or born from human desire or passion, but born from God. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory, glory like that of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. That ends the reading of the piece of poetry that starts the Gospel of John. Well, John's story came about to show how a people living in light came about. The similarities continue in the way each account frames the story of the people and their heritage. The Genesis account starts in a garden and centers around Adam. The family line that follows includes Adam and Eve and runs through Sarah and Abraham and Isaac and Rebekah and Joseph and all the way to Moses. It's a story of a people, who they were, where they came from, and who came from them. Patriarchal lineage was important to the Hebrew people. It gave a heft to someone's story by showing it's connecting that person to a family line. In the Gospel of Luke, for example, Jesus' lineage is tracked back through the Jewish history to inform Luke's reader that Jesus is the promised Messiah. The climax of this list in that Gospel of Luke reads, Jared, the son of Mahaliah, the son of Canaan, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Well, the Gospel of John's creation story, here's the beauty. It's not based on lineage and patriarchal lines. In fact, no names are mentioned at all. Instead, it makes the point that people are in the family of God regardless of their bloodlines. They're born of God. The Gospel of John replaces the narrative of familial tribes with an invitation to the family of God. It's really a big deal, editorializing here for a moment. This is really a big deal in our society because we are still trying to outlive patriarchal narratives in this society, that who you are is given extra meaning because of who your parents and specifically who your father is. A male-dominated human structure through patriarchy has wreaked havoc in our society and around the world. And the idea that the Gospel of John some 2,000 years ago was doing what it could to break down patriarchal society and basis, I think is incredibly powerful. The idea that you call people to be part of the life of the family of God and not the family of your patriarchal heritage, absolutely revolutionary in the first century and in the 21st century. All right, back into the discussion here. The Gospel of John replaces the narrative of familial tribes with an invitation into the family of God. Anyone who was active in the way of Jesus, who believes in his name, is part of the family. This story removes restrictions so that all people see themselves as members of the full family of God. When Jesus encounters those outside the, quote, chosen lineage, he calls them brothers and sisters in the family of God. Later in the Gospel of John, we see that what was true of Jesus is true of everyone in the family. We are children of the same source. Jesus, as the Son of God, is not the exception to humanity, but is presented as the brother in a new humanity. This story explores what this humanity looks like, lives like, loves like. This is a creation story of a new way of being. The key to this vision of humanity is found in the 7 miraculous signs that we're going to be exploring in this book. Even this terminology is important. Look, the Gospel of John doesn't refer to the stories that we're going to read in the Gospel of John, and there's 7 of them. Editorializing for a moment, when Jesus says, "Those who believe in me will do the works I'm doing," he's actually referring to the 7 miraculous signs that the gospel has just laid out that Jesus undertakes. So back to this reading, because this part will make more sense to you, I think, when you read it this way, if you haven't read the earlier chapters especially. John does not refer to these stories as miracles, but rather as miraculous signs. As you may have already guessed, miraculous signs is a phrase used only in the Gospel of John. Again, this is intentional. The author of the Gospel is making it clear that these miracles are indicators of something. They're signs that point us to something more grand, more wonderful, more important, more repeatable than the details of the miracle. These 7 select stories show us a tangible vision for a participatory way of life. In the remainder of this book, we will explore these 7 miraculous signs, see how they show us a path for creating a celebratory, empathic, empowered, abundant, fearless, participatory, fully engaged, here and now way of living for all of humanity. We will see how people are living this reality now around the world, and how those miraculous signs were intended to call all of us into greater works from the very start. All right, so that's chapter 3. That's a real doozy of a chapter, frankly. I mean, there is so much in there. It took, for the sort of book discussion side of this thing, it took a lot. My editor, Carla Barnhill, is the best in the business, as they say, and she really helped me because there was so much to try to jam in between the linguistic work of the text and the cultural setting, and how are you going to, that thing had been 5 different chapters that were all crunched down into one. And, it takes a bit of, well, at least I don't know if it takes it. I felt the need to sort of pause at a couple of moments and to give a thought or two around, what was going on in that text, because I think it's also important. I think it's important you see the Gospel of John as particular. I think it's important that the word believe is not confused with belief. I think it's really important that life is not seen as a destination for afterlife, but it's talked about that you're joining into the everlasting, abundant life that has been in front of humanity all along. I think it's really important to see this not as an exclusivist narrative at all. In fact, its whole design is that it shows the full participation of the family of God. So, I mean, I guess I could have just written that, right? That would have been easy enough. I could have just said those things and taken it from there. All right, so I see we've got a couple of people on the Zoom part. Scott, I'm just going to give you a chance to talk if you want to. I'm not sure you want to or not, but if you do, we'd sure love to have a chance to hear from you if you want to share anything at all. So, Scott, feel free to go ahead if you like. Hey, Scott, thank you so much for that. Boy, in a couple of, probably tomorrow, we're going to get into the first chapter, the first two miraculous signs. And the second one is about a boy who dies of a fever. And I got to tell you, I can't wait to get there because I think it says something about COVID and the idea of what the gospel call of John says to everyone, and how it is that we should be seeing the people who are working to break these fevers and to heal humanity as actually doing the very work that Jesus is up to. And in fact, I think there's a whole way of understanding the miraculous sign of the healing of the young boy with the fever that is so instructive for what we're doing. So if you pick up the book early, you can read ahead, but we'll, I guess it'll probably be Wednesday by the time we get to that discussion. So anyway, Scott, thanks. And others can indicate if they want to be, if they want to pop on. All right. So I'm going to jump into chapter 4 for all of you that are following along here. And, here we go. Those who are just joining in, this is a reading of the book of my book, Outdoing Jesus, How Ordinary People Are Outdoing Jesus and Why It's Good News was the original title for this book. I've now it was retitled 7 Ways to Live the Promise of Greater Than. I really liked that early subtitle. In fact, sometimes I still refer to the book by the subtitle of How Ordinary People Are Outdoing Jesus, Why It's Good News and how you're likely one of them. So anyway, that's how I read the book. But people that know more about book titling than I do help me pick the subtitle, the good folks over at the publisher. So here we go. Chapter 4, Celebration. Now look, each of these miraculous signs have, I put a title around them of what humanity is up to, what our call is, that these signs point us to something that humanity ought to be a part. And this one is about celebration. And it's the story about that time the wine ran out. I really like this one. Okay, it starts out, here's the gospel story as it reads out of the Gospel of John. I'll read that first. And by the way, you're going to note how short, how unimpressive, frankly, as far as miracle stories go, the 7 miracles are in the Gospel of John. They're really quite short and to the point. And you'll probably notice a few things. And if you stick with me through the whole reading of the book, I'll be pointing these out about not only what the gospel miraculous sign stories in John say, but what they don't say. And frankly, if you've heard sermons on any of these passages, if you've heard someone give a reflection on any of the 7 miraculous signs in the Gospel of John, and by the way, there's only 7 of them in John. There's not like 24. There's no random list. There are 7 specific ones. I think they're in a particular order for a particular reason. I think Gospel of John's all about that. But if you know stuff about these stories, you probably heard them from sermons, because you're going to find that in the text, they're not as robust as you might think, until you give a second reading, which is what I do in the book. So here we go. All right. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to this celebration. When the wine ran out, Jesus' mother said to him, "They don't have any more wine." And Jesus replied, "What does that have to do with me? My time has not yet come." His mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish cleansing ritual, each able to hold about 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the head waiter." And they did. And the waiter tasted the water that had become wine. He didn't know where it came from, though the servants who drew the water, they knew. Well, the head waiter called the groom and said to the groom, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then they bring out the second-rate wine only when the guests are, drinking freely. But you kept the good wine until now." This was the first miraculous sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. As the first of a set of 7 miraculous signs in the Gospel of John, this one seems to be a bit of an odd pick. And at the risk of sounding sacrilegious, it's not really all that impressive, at least as miracles go. Like, if the Gospel of John was trying to show how otherworldly Jesus was by his miraculous acts, well, then they might tell about how Jesus could, fly. I mean, really showcase Jesus as a miracle worker, not bound by the laws of nature. Instead, the author starts this entire set of stories with something that has all the punch of a party trick. A pastor friend of mine, Josh Scott, over in Nashville, put it this way when we were talking about this. "When I first preached on this passage at our church, I was struck by how it feels like an ideal miracle for college students. Why would the writer choose this as the first miraculous sign in his record of the life of Jesus?" Well, here's what I think about that. The miraculous signs are not about Jesus breaking the laws of physics. No, they're about Jesus breaking open human potential. These signs are not intended as power displays. Something far more and far more invitational and inclusive is going on with these stories. Maybe you noticed that Jesus performed this miraculous sign reluctantly after some prodding by his mother. It was done in a way that kept the attention of the crowd away from Jesus and on the groom. Did you notice that, by the way? Did you notice how in the story, like, no one knew what was going on? The groom certainly didn't even know. Like, they didn't even know Jesus was part of this whole thing. It was all about the waiters and the head waiter. Those who knew that the miraculous sign had taken place, Jesus, his disciple, his mothers, and the servants, they didn't announce this miracle to the wedding guests. Jesus wasn't trying to draw attention to his power. The outcome of the miracle was that people had more to drink. The celebration and the reputation of the groom, that's what was saved. What is helpful to know about the first century is that suitable drink was tough to come by. At its core, this story is about changing undrinkable water into something drinkable. And that was done by the act of making wine. We tend to see wine in our world as a luxury drink, but in the first century, wine represented something to drink that was not contaminated. To the first century mind, this water into wine sign pointed to a critical issue that went well beyond this one wedding party. It touched on survival itself. While we tend to think that the problem of undrinkable water is solved by removing pollutants and making the water more pure, for the bulk of human history, drinkable liquid came through boiling, fermenting, or distilling. See, the development of wine was crucial in providing a drink source to much of the Mesopotamian world of the first century. Wine and other alcohol were primary sources of drink all the way into the 18th century, all around the world. In fact, in his book, A History of the World in Six Glasses, Tom Standage tells how civilization advanced from the Stone Age to the 21st century through the development of beer, wine, spirits, coffee, tea, and cola, soft drinks. Sandage shows how the development of wine and beer opened up travel by offering journeyers a longer-lasting, portable drink. Even the productivity gains in the 17th century England can be traced back to the creation of coffee houses, which provided the public something safe to drink and replaced the local pub. What Jesus does in this story is being done today in incredible ways all around the world. People are performing amazing feats of alchemy by changing undrinkable liquid into life-saving water. As impressive as it was to turn water into wine, if you were to see human sewage being transformed into pure drinking water for millions, you would see that it's a greater than extension of this very miracle. The people at Janaki Bioenergy have created a wastewater treatment method that converts human sewage and waste into drinkable water in a matter of minutes. The Omni processor produces water from the waste, human waste, then incinerates the remaining waste solid to create an energy source. This machine produces clean, drinkable water for 43,000 people from the waste of 100,000 people each day. This incredible cycle from human waste to drinkable water to an energy source is the kind of greater than work imperative for human health and flourishing today. This purification process, along with astounding leaps in desalination that allows seawater to be turned into drinkable water and the ability to convert dew collected at night in the desert into a reliable water source, is helping people across the African continent who suffer from devastating consequences from the shortage of water. Turning the undrinkable into drinkable results in widespread cultural transformation that especially benefit women and girls who typically spend days collecting water from polluted rivers and then having to boil it. Access to clean water allows them time to explore school, business, creativity, and life. Providing usable water has an enormous impact on reducing the need for war and conflict that sit at the heart of so much of the poverty and human suffering in the world. More than 2 billion people across the world do not have access to clean water or proper sanitation. This results in the deaths of over 700,000 children each year. There are real fears that if water is not made available to the growing populations around the world, conflicts over water will be what all the wars are about in the future. Subtitle heading: Saving Celebration and Saving Honor. The water to wine story is set inside the story of a wedding celebration. Jesus is called by his mother to save the celebration. For the party, it had already run out of wine. Now, many people have a hard time seeing Jesus in the role of making sure that people have enough alcohol to drink at a wedding party. It strikes them as odd that Jesus would be into saving parties by providing alcohol. It feels less likely that the opening miracle of a gospel and more like that scene from Talladega Nights where the characters are discussing how they should pray before a meal and their ridiculous conversation turns into how they think about Jesus. And that's when the character Cal Naughton Jr. says, "I like to picture Jesus in a tuxedo t-shirt because it says, like, I want to be formal, but I'm here to party too, because I like to party, so I like my Jesus to like to party." Some people, they have trouble wrapping their heads around the idea of Jesus as the party savior. But people need celebration, relaxation, and resuscitation to be healthy human beings. The structure of the Hebrew faith, it was built around the Sabbath, a day of rest and celebration on a weekly basis. Stan Mitchell, a Christian pastor and friend of mine and a great scholar, he knows an awful lot about the details of the Jewish weddings of the first century. He helped me to understand this story when he mentioned that the ancient weddings were multiple day affairs. He noted the significance in the opening line of the story. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. That was the days that the vows took place. The wedding would have started on the first day. The 2 previous days, they were celebration days when the family met to practice their new one-family customs. The third day, that was when the couple, quote, became one. So it was important that this day be a success. In the gospel account, it tells us that something had gone wrong. The hosts were about to run out of wine on the most important day. Apparently, because of customary hospitality expectations, this would have carried great shame for the groom. Turning the water into wine is not used in this story to enhance Jesus' reputation at the party. It's used to save the reputation of the groom. The groom allows Jesus' mother, Jesus, and the servants to join him in making the celebration a success. The story makes the point of having Jesus' mother notice that they were going to run out of wine. She is the one who saw the social impact. She is the one who brought together the resources needed for the bride and the groom to be supported and the guests to continue their important cultural engagement. Nassar Sabani does something similar by being what he calls the streets barber. His story is chronicled in a fantastic and heart-stirring video. You can see it on YouTube. You should look it up. On his 1 day a week off of work, Nassar takes to the streets to give haircuts to homeless people. This intimate act of connection not only transforms the person's appearance, but also seems to change the person's entire affect. In the video, Nassar talks with a man about his struggles. The man says, "I drink because I like alcohol." While cutting his hair, Nassar says to him, candidly and straightforwardly, "Think about it. You drink because you feel lonely." The man's face softens as if he's been understood for the first time in a long time. He agrees and says, "Yeah, I drink because I feel lonely." Nassar reaches out, puts his hands on the man's shoulder. Nasser has taken time to support this man, to help care for his hair and beard, to celebrate the man and his life. He's not there to lay blame or to take credit. He's there to share his gift, and that gift helped the man see himself free of shame, at least for a little while. That so often, I'm sorry, I should read that better. And that gift helps the man free himself, at least for a little while, from the shame that so often goes with being homeless and chronically unemployed. Aaron Westendorp is part of my church in Minneapolis and lives with Moebius syndrome, a craniofacial neurological condition. He's not able to speak, so he typically types on an iPad that's connected to his wheelchair, and that turns his typing into speech. When he was 9 years old, he was granted a trip to Disney World by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. He told me, "I went to Disney World with them 23 years ago, and it still has an impact on me to this very day." Aaron said they honored him by taking his needs seriously and making it possible for him to stay in a hotel and ride in a van and fly in an airplane and visit the most magical place on earth. For a 9-year-old, this was the ultimate celebration. You see, celebration, freedom from shame, the recognition of shared humanity, these are the undercurrents of Jesus' first miraculous sign. Today, some do this vital work as their profession, while others engage in it less formally. They're all persons in their They are the persons in their families and friendships and work environments who make sure that people are recognized, cheered on, and celebrated. They remember birthdays and anniversaries. They're quick to celebrate the accomplishments of others. They are committed to finding ways to change a bedroom into a place of celebration, or to imbue an otherwise sterile workroom with a party atmosphere. They turn water into wine in their own ways. Chapter subtitle, Purification to Celebration. The water to wine story is more significant than merely changing the chemical makeup of the water, however. It includes changing that which has been set aside as holy. In fact, the story goes to great lengths to indicate that the water from the jars that were used, they were for religious purification purposes. The jars seem to be an essential detail to this story. Indeed, we know more about the jars than about almost anything else in the story. We don't know whose wedding it is. We don't know why Jesus' mother is concerned about the amount of wine, why it's her concern at all. We don't know why Jesus is even there. But we're made aware that there are 6 jars and that they're made of stone and that they could hold somewhere between 20 and 30 gallons each, and that the water in them was used for ritual purification. Something about those jars is pretty important. The ritual cleansing practices of the first century Jewish communities was not only to produce sanitary benefits, but it was also to make people acceptable for inclusion in religious activities. So, when the story has Jesus change water that is meant for religious purification into wine, it's making a not-so-subtle statement about how that which has been set aside for religious purposes could be used for the benefit of people. This has great resonance with Jesus' teaching about how even the Sabbath, the most holiest of days, was created for the benefit of humanity and not the other way around. This element of Jesus turning the understood religious narrative on its head happens in all 7 of the miraculous signs. These signs point us not only to what we are capable of in the physical sense, but also how we can be free of any narrative, religious or not, that considers something more valuable than people. This is among the more important implications of these miraculous signs of Jesus, and they're about expanding what people believe is possible. They are agents of change, not only in the physical elements, but also in the hearts, minds, and imagination of people who hear the signs. In this way, they are not only signs that point back, but they're also signs that point to what could be. This is what we begin to see in the storyline of the Gospel of John, as the word starts to spread about what is possible. It's chapter 4 of Outdoing Jesus. All right, I really like that story. I've had a chance to preach on that one at a couple of churches, and I just love getting to the point where you celebrate the celebrators, where you remind them that they're miracle workers. You remind people who do celebrations and parties and recognitions that they're saving the important role of celebration in the human life. How crucial it is. Some of us who are trapped in our mundane lives of work or being trapped at home in this coronavirus, we know how much we would love to celebrate someone's life, how much we'd love to have a party, how important it is for people to be recognized and celebrated. And in this gospel, the idea that what Jesus is doing is saving a party, I just think is so great. And then this idea that people who are going to always clear the path, the religious path, where some people have been excluded, by taking those jars of water and saying that that thing which was kept has kept people away because they were not ceremonially clean, it now becomes useful for saving this wedding party. I just think it's such a great reminder of how important it is that all of us who want to open up the expansion, open up the vision of what the religious faith should be calling any of us to. These stories do that. So, all right, thanks for listening. Those of you on the podcast, thanks. You can put all this together. By the way, I do have a podcast. You can search for my name and find it. You'll end up with an audio reading with some editorial comments of this entire book. I'd encourage you to go buy your own copy, though. Nothing wrong with having a copy of that thing around the house, Outdoing Jesus. Go pick up a copy of it, share it with a friend. If you're not somebody who likes to read, I don't know, find a friend who is and send it off to them. And to all of you on Facebook and here in Zoom, thanks so much for participating with me today. And we'll see you tomorrow. Hey, by the way, if you like this and you want to do this with more than just one guy reading to you for 45 minutes, tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Central Time, Electionary, where you can interact with dozens of people for 45 minutes who will be talking with you. So join us there over at the Vote Common Good Facebook stream, and I'll also stream it on my Facebook page.